Good morning. It's a tricky world, an especially tricky world for Western diplomats. It looks to some people like Gorbachev is winning the public relations battle on the arms talks. It looks like the Americans overreact incredibly on Gaddafi, the flake, the terrorist. We've got many worries in our cultural sovereignty and free trade and trade with Japan. And who's here to talk about it this morning? The Right Honourable Joe Clark, Canada's Minister of External Affairs. Later in the program, we're going to go back to always a pressing problem, missing children. And in the studio, I've got Phil Amisano, the father of Jennifer. And Jennifer was taken by her mother in 1984, January, and Mr. Amisano doesn't know yet where she is. But Julie Cullen, co-chairman of the Child Fund for Canada, is going to tell us what she thinks of Perrin Beatty's new plans for a central registry and perhaps other assistance in finding missing children. And also here to give us his expertise, a man who's fought the battles on both sides about missing children, lawyer Bruce Katz. But first, after the break, the Right Honourable Joe Clark. The Geneva arms talks resume today. And last night, Mikhail Gorbachev announced to the world his new plan to rid the world of nuclear weapons in 15 years and extends his own nuclear moratorium for 3 months. It would seem to me, Mr. Clark, that this man Gorbachev and his attractive wife seem to be winning the edge of the battle of propaganda and making the Americans look even more unreasonable than some European countries think they are.
Well, they're certainly fighting the battle of propaganda, and that means two things. One, we in the West have to take account of it and not ignore the propaganda impact of what he's doing. But secondly, that's a very clear signal that they have joined this debate, that they're serious about it, because for him to undertake those announcements to be publicized in the West means they're also being publicized in the Soviet Union. And while it is one kind of new to have a Soviet leader speaking to the West, it's another kind of new to have the Soviet leader speaking that way to his own people. It'll create expectations for change that I think provide some guarantees that Mr. Gorbachev, like Mr. Reagan, will be under some pressure to produce. Not necessarily in the next meeting, but that we're on a track that can lead to some actual reductions in the levels of nuclear warheads.
Do you therefore feel actually optimistic about the prospects? Because when you look at the world, the rest of the world today, and you look at the man whom Reagan calls a flake, Gaddafi, we may be facing the Holocaust or low-intensity wars rather than facing the Soviet Union down the road.
Yeah, one should never be too optimistic about matters in international affairs, but I think that on the Soviet-U.S. side, we have much more reason for optimism than we did before the first Geneva meeting. I think there is sincerity on both sides. I think we're a long, long way from an agreement, but I think that it's much better than it was. The terrorism craze is new. It's an assault upon everything we've known and all the ways we've acted in international affairs. Terrorists break rules. The rest of us are accustomed to working by rules, and that's the great advantage they have over us.
But the big difference between your diplomacy and the American diplomacy is that would any Canadian, including yourself, agree with Reagan that Gaddafi is a flake and a barbarian?
President Reagan can get away with saying those things more than others can. We agree with what President Reagan has done on the issue of the response to Libya, and more particularly, it's our view that there comes a time when you've got to stop just talking about terrorism and you've got to start exploring those actions that nations can take together against it.
Would it not be proper for me to interpret the Americans aren't too pleased with our somewhat lackluster response to Reagan and the American Schulz's appeal for a policy of paralysis? He wants to see a policy of paralysis for Libya, doesn't he?
Yes, he wants to see that.
Complete boycott, wipe them off from human contact.
He wants terrorism to stop. If I can interpret what George Shultz is saying, it is not particularly about Libya, it is about terrorism. And terrorism has arisen in Libya. We have reason to believe that they were incubating the people who were responsible for the Vienna and the Rome airport attacks. Something has to be done about that. And I think what the Americans are doing is saying, look, we've all talked. The talk has just led to new atrocities. What we've got to do is demonstrate that there is some way that civilized countries can deal with this. They took a modest leadership. They asked a more modest response by some of their friends. Canada responded. We're doing things that a number of other countries aren't. What's more significant, in my view, is that Italy has responded, because that means some movement from the European continent, and important movement. They're cutting off arms sales.
But what have we done, sir? Perhaps I could say that if there are any job vacancies in Libya, the unemployed, the Canadian oil technicians from Alberta will be queuing up to go there. Now, would you agree that that's happening now?
I don't think it's happening now. I think there was a danger that it could happen. We have no power to stop them except to ask them not to go. We've asked them not to go.
You don't want Canadians to take any jobs in Libya at all?
I don't want Canadians to move in behind Americans to take advantage of the American economic measures. And we've done more than that, Jack. We've taken away export insurance that used to help investment from Canada in Libya. We've taken away the so-called PEMD program. And the most important thing we've done is we now require, as a result of an action we took last week, we now require every export to Libya to seek a permit. And we've said there will be no permits granted, for example, for the export of oil drilling equipment, which is of particular use to them because of the Western technology.
Has there been any hostile or unsympathetic, antagonistic reaction from Libya to Canada?
I wouldn't say hostile. I think that they would have preferred we didn't take those actions. And just let me anticipate the next question. Is Canada in any danger because we have taken those actions?
You're talking about terrorism in Canada?
We're talking about becoming a target, and there's a possibility that we could. The point I make is that well before we did anything with regard to Libya, Canadians were the targets of terrorism. I was at a funeral in Bicycle, Alberta in the fall of this year where a young woman and her infant son who were involved in no way at all, except that accident carried them into that region, were killed by terrorists. And we know about the baggage handlers at Narita. We know about the investigation into Air India. We're not immune from terrorism. We are a country that has influence, modest, but some influence on the way other countries behave. And I think that we were all aghast, and we sat back and looked at what was happening as terrorism broke all the rules. And what we've got to do now, and it's much tougher, is try to sit down and find some agreement on the new rules that might contain it.
Must ask you the next question on your own first question. If Gaddafi carries out his threats, which he has made a number of times, to bring terrorism, if necessary, to North America, would Canada stand by any overt United States military action, which is obviously not far from their minds?
We very much hope it will not come to that. And in fact, we think that the area that is within our control that requires more urgent attention is to make sure that we are very well protected in Canada. And the Cabinet has been looking at that for some time. You'll recall that there had been a decision quite a few months ago to take RCMP officers out of airports. We've reversed that, and we're doing other things that we believe will make Canadians more secure.
You're telling me that we are increasing our airport security in case we become a target for terrorism, be it from Indian sources or Libyan sources?
We are a target for terrorism. That has been proven this year. And we've got to take precautions that take account of that, and the government is doing it. We're not going to be advertising chapter and verse, but I think Canadians, and particularly Canadians in this province with a major international event coming with Expo, need to know that their government is looking at the problem, doing everything we can to ensure safety. We can offer no guarantees. What is most unsettling about terrorism is that no one can offer any guarantees at all, but we can step up our procedures, and we're doing that.
With the hundreds of suspected potential terrorists, we believe, from parts of India, are we prepared on our good relations with the Indian government to send these people back?
We have indicated that we will send back to India people who have made refugee claims for which there is no base, and we have satisfied ourselves that they would not be in danger in India. The other thing that we're doing is now discussing with the Indians a full extradition treaty, so that people who were accused, who were subject to court procedures in India, could be extradited. There is not now a treaty. There is, however, an action that we took on our own to provide the extradition of people who committed offenses after the 31st of October.
More with the Right Honourable Joe Clark, External Affairs Minister, after the break. Mr. Mr. Clark, I'm sure you're well aware of the somewhat disastrous state of the economy, certainly in British Columbia, and that many people are scared witless of two things. One, any impositions on our presently fairly free-trading lumber to the United States, and Eastern influences which might put more pressure to keep our lumber out of the United States. Now, are we making any progress at all on free trade, or are we still in the airy-fairy kind of pre-preparation, perhaps to talk soon?
We've invited the Americans to join. The president has said it's fine with him, but he needs agreement from Congress. He's asked for that. They've got 60 sitting days in their Congress that'll be up about the end of March. My guess, if I had to give one, is that they will approve the idea of discussions with Canada. Discussions may lead to nothing, but we've got some things that we want, and they have some things that they want, and we
what do
think
you
out
want
of
for
that
the
will come an
West?
agreement.
We're afraid very much of impositions, and if we have an imposition of any kind on our lumber crossing the border, we are in real trouble.
Yeah, what I want for the Western Canada is to try to have developed out here some of the kinds of advantages to potential manufacturing in Western Canada that was given to Ontario by the Auto Pact. And there's no question at all, when you look back at what happened to Ontario and to jobs and to moving beyond a resource base into secondary industrial development, the Auto Pact was very helpful. It provided security, it provided access to markets that weren't there before. We think that there are fields, petrochemicals, a number of other fields where that same kind of thing could happen in Western Canada if we get the market.
And we won't give an inch on lumber, will we?
The lumber question is separate from the negotiations on trade. We hope to have the lumber question settled early. We've fought a very good fight so far. And when I say we, I mean everybody. From the IWA through the lumber companies through the provinces.
We are relying, of course, on the Reagan pocket veto, not only in the lumber, on other issues, if it goes against us at any time in any stage.
We are, but I tell you, Jack, we've got lumber, we've got raspberries, we've got salt cod, we've got steel, we've got a whole range, and that is, there is a pocket veto, but it's not a giant pocket, and we can ask him to do it 2 or 3 times. Exactly what we're saying is that it's a good thing for the President of the United States and the Prime Minister of Canada to have the kind of personal relations that would let Brian Mulroney phone Ronald Reagan and say, look, we need help on lumber, or we need help on raspberries. You can't do that day after day after day.
But we might have to give a little, though. We might have, for instance, to give Time magazine its deductible provisions again and lose, and perhaps allow our publishing companies to be taken over, and give the border stations back their access to Canadian markets, and lose even more of our cultural sovereignty.
I read about that. I have not heard an American propose changes in Bill C-58, not heard an American propose changes with regard to Time magazine. I recall very clearly that there were some proposals prior to the Reagan-Mulroney summit in Quebec last year that the question of Bill C-58 should be on the agenda. Canada said no then, and I would expect that I see no reason why we would change that position. But sure.
And you're not aware of any pressure from the Americans on cultural sovereignty?
Oh, they want to discuss it, and obviously there are some parts of the United States who want to, who would like to have, without any question, some parts of the United States would like to sweep more deeply into our Canadian cultural industries. We've made it clear that Canada's cultural integrity is just not negotiable. Now, I'm not going to start the process of saying we won't discuss this, we won't discuss that, we won't discuss that, because we'd end up with no negotiation. What the Americans want from us are a couple of things. One, we have some practices, we have some tariff levels that they would like to see down. We have some practices that they would like to see changed. Some of our own Buy Canadian practices that don't give them access. One of the very important things they want out of this negotiation, the administration wants, is that they know they've got a bear of a problem with protectionism, and they have to prove that they can make a good deal with someone, somewhere, if they're going to provide an alternative to protectionism. We're the best people they can make a deal with.
But of course, you've got the man Peterson and a couple of other recalcitrant prime ministers who are going to make life very difficult to you. Peterson talks about 270,000 instantly lost jobs in Ontario if free trade were to come in, wham bam.
I don't know where Premier Peterson dreams up those figures. They're not real figures. But he's got his right to enter into the case. And indeed, what we're trying to do here is involve the provinces right from the beginning. Because you spoke the kind of fear that is felt in my province of Alberta and in yours of BC, and that is that in the past, on every negotiation, when push comes to shove, it's Western Canada or Atlantic Canada that gets shoved. And what I'm trying to do, and we're having some success, is build in a system so that the provinces are there throughout the process, so that it's not a question of shoving BC aside, it's a question of having a discussion of what our final offer is.
Talking of shoving BC aside, of course, the new Japanese auto plant goes to Quebec, and we're the people who desperately need secondary industry. But despite the fact that we do some trade with Japan, do you hope to make any real negotiations with Prime Minister Nakasone? I mean, we're selling some lumber to them, we're selling some stuff to them, but surely that trade is capable of being vastly expanded in our raw materials.
It is, but let's come back to the auto plant.
They're too smart for us.
Oh, no, well, we can be pretty smart too, point one. Point two, we share some common interests. We certainly share a common enemy. The common enemy is U.S. protectionism. And to come to the auto plant, one of the reasons, I don't know all of them, one of the reasons that it went to Ontario is that there is a larger market there. And one of the things we're saying about the negotiations with the U.S. is that given this long east-west country, if we are confining, if we are basing manufacturing development in British Columbia on access to markets in Ontario, right, we're out of luck. But if we can base manufacturing industries in BC on access to markets in Oregon and South, then we have a greater opportunity here.
You said that Nakasone and you have the common aim in mind of the common enemy of U.S. protectionism.
Yes.
Do we have formal talks going with the Japanese or just under GATT?
Just under GATT. But what's important is that there are three countries in the world, us, the Japanese, the United States, who are taking the lead in trying to get new GATT talks. Indeed, we've proposed that they hold them here in Canada, that they hold them in Montreal.
Because we're one of the last major companies in the world that doesn't have a major bilateral trade agreement with anybody.
Sure. There's us and there's Australia. And we're the only two modern industrialized countries that don't have access to a guaranteed market of at least 1 million. And that's just trouble down the line. Trouble today.
Apartheid. It never seems to me, Mr. Clark, with due respect, that you've ever really done anything except ask for voluntary restrictions on activities in South Africa. We're not very strong on trying to wipe out apartheid, are we?
Oh, well, we have done a number of other things. We have, again, cut off export insurance. We've cut off the sale of the export of sensitive materials like computers. We've done a wide range of those kinds of limiting things. We've also, this government particularly has, increased scholarship aid to blacks, increased direct financial aid to the families of people who were affected by the turmoil in South Africa. But we recognize...
I mean, sending money over there.
We're sending money over there. We're not doing it directly. We're doing it through intermediaries that make sure the money gets there, people who have standing in South Africa. The most important thing that we can do, it seems to us, is use our such influence as we have in the Commonwealth and elsewhere to try to get the countries whose trade counts for more against South Africa to join in common action. You know, it is easy for Canadians to have opinions because we don't have an awful lot of trade on the line. The real challenge for us is to try to change opinion in two places. One in South Africa, to make them realize that they can't continue with those policies forever. And secondly, among some of our allies who have more at stake. And
Britain, for instance, has 200,000 jobs at stake if they cut off all, if they boycotted South Africa.
Same kind of thing in West Germany. And that means that we have got to recognize that if we want to change the problem in South Africa and not simply get satisfaction about being on the right side of an issue in Canada, it is a dexterous, slow process. Now, what's going to happen next? We are sending an experts group to South Africa, the Commonwealth is, the Nassau meeting, in which, by the way, the Prime Minister of Canada played an extraordinary and key role. That group is going. It reports back to Mr. Mulroney and to Mr. Gandhi and other prime ministers in early June, and we will hope that they will have some recommendations as to what new can be done by the Commonwealth together. If they don't, Canada will have to look at new actions we take on our own.
But our foreign policy is based not on confrontation, but persuasion.
But persuasion with a glove, with a fist in the glove.
Iron fist in the velvet glove.
And it's very clear, I've made it clear many times, the Prime Minister did at the United Nations, that if it comes to that, Canada will cut off diplomatic relations and will cut off economic relations. But once we've done that, we have no more influence in South Africa.
Your calls and questions to Right Honourable Joe Clark, External Affairs Minister, after the break. Been a couple of years since we've done this, Mr. Clark, isn't it?
Yes, it has.
I don't know what they'll have at you on. Go ahead, please.
Is this me?
That's you.
Okay, Mr. Clark, I'm wondering if the Canadian government would consider asking the United States to stop its terrorism in Nicaragua, since they're making the request with regard to Libya, and also if Canada might ask the United States to declare Prime Minister Botha a flake also.
Okay, two blunt questions.
Canada has taken a position from the outset, certainly this government has, that what is wrong in Central America is a problem of poverty and of economic development, and that that situation is aggravated. It's made worse by the insertion of Cold War East-West politics in there. We don't think that the Americans should be doing some of the things they're doing. We don't think the Soviets should be doing some of the things they're doing, either directly or through some of their agents there. I'm a foreign minister, not a commentator. So what I have to look for is ways in which Canada can take actions which will affect other countries, affect their behavior, perhaps achieve some progress in a region. What we're doing in Central America is saying, look, one of the things Canada is very good at is peacekeeping. If there is a peace arranged through the Condadora process, they're going to need some ways to make it work. And we've been devoting a lot of Canada's time and energies to sending people down there to make sure that process works.
Could be a little more vocal about it, though, I think.
Thank you, sir. We didn't mention this Botha thing. We're giving that the disdain it deserves.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Webster.
My pleasure. Go ahead, please.
Hello, Mr. Clark. My question is also about U.S.-sponsored terrorism, namely the Contras. And if we can take action against Libya for their sponsorship, isn't there anything we can do to put pressure on the U.S. government to stop supporting the Contras?
What we have done with regard to the United States is indicated that we disagree profoundly with the analysis they have of how one resolves problems in Central America. We have done that. And the Americans are continuing whatever their policy is. I don't accept your characterization of it. That speaks of Central America. Let's look at the very different situation where we have, for the first time, the incubation of state terrorism, people who mount random attacks on the obviously innocent and who are creating a terrible instability all over the world.
Abu Nidal and his troops.
There is something we can do about that, and we are trying to do something about that. It's slight. It's going to take step by step, but I don't think anyone in British Columbia would be seriously suggesting to me that because they are not 100% happy with what the Americans are doing in Central America, that we should, for Central American reasons, try to for Central American reasons, ignore terrorism in the Middle East.
Go ahead, please.
Hello, Mr. Clark. Good morning.
Good morning.
I have two questions. One has to do with nuclear development. I'm interested when we talk a lot about the superpowers. I'm curious to get some input from you as to what you feel about, for example, France and all of the nuclear testing that they're involved in. And I wonder if the world is taking an interest in some of these so-called maybe secondary countries and what they're doing with nuclear development.
There is a regime, as you know, called the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and we try to get countries to sign it, particularly countries that have not yet developed a nuclear capacity but might. There was a review conference of the NPT in September of last year that a lot of people, including, I have to confess, Canada, thought might be a failure. Mm-hmm. It was more successful than we thought, and because I think that there is a very real fear about what happens if more countries get into the game. So let me say three things. One, it's important that we pay attention to what France, Britain, China are doing, but we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that the real decisions will be made by Mr. Reagan, Mr. Gorbachev. Secondly, there are some small things Canada can do in some of the other arms control discussions that are going on. I called in all of my ambassadors in the arms control field right after Geneva and asked them to identify whether it's chemical weapons, whether it's something else where Canada might be able to, in this atmosphere, to nudge some agreement ahead.
Go ahead, please.
Mr. Clark, you just defined terrorism as random attacks on the innocent, but a minute before you said that you didn't characterize the American-backed Contra attacks against Nicaraguans as terrorism. And my first question is, how can you explain that contradiction? And my second question is, what do you think Canada could do unilaterally in Nicaragua to help the Nicaraguans defend themselves and to rebuild their country?
Let me tell you, Jack, one of the great curiosities I've discovered since becoming the Secretary of State for External Affairs for Canada, and that is the degree to which our Canadian news about international affairs had been dominated by what the Americans are doing in Central America. And there seems to be a great desire on the part of Canadians to pass judgment on that, almost to the exclusion of some of the other areas in which we can be influential.
Libya, for instance.
Libya, for instance. I'm prepared to admit, with regret, that that there are limits upon the influence that Canada can have upon U.S. policy in Central America. We are doing what we can, and when we disagree with them, as when they introduced an embargo on Nicaragua, we said no. When they say we don't want aid into Nicaragua, we send aid. We're doing those things that we can do.
You're not ashamed of your policies in relation to the American actions in Nicaragua, but you're with the Americans up to the point of covert military action and pressure on Libya.
And the other point I'm trying to make here is that countries in foreign policy have to act, not just talk. And we could lecture the Americans, and we could say that we're not going to join with you against terrorism because we don't like everything you're doing in Central America.
That would be stupid, wouldn't it?
That's my view.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, two very brief questions. First question, Mr. Clark. I was just wondering if you could explain why Canada has such limits on what it can do because of American pressures in regard to the Libyan and South American situation.
That doesn't make much sense, and the question's already been answered, I think.
There are the limitations on what we can do have to do with the fact that we don't have a sixth fleet. We have the power of influence and of advice. In many cases, there is no way that we can exercise that. In terms of the Middle East, and in terms of terrorism generally, there are some specific, limited things that we can do, and we're doing them.
Go ahead from Armstrong, BC. Go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Clark.
Morning.
Yes, I want to ask you a question about shipbuilding and our sovereignty on the West Coast. We have no shipbuilding capacity left out here. It is
We're well aware of that. What's your question?
Okay, there was $3.87 billion in shipbuilding awarded to New Brunswick and to Quebec. There was another $2 billion awarded last year into the east. We got $150 million of it. We have a 14% unemployment rate out here. We have absolutely nothing in the way of defense on the West Coast. If you're looking at sovereignty in the north, you have no sovereignty up there, and you have none on the West Coast, and you have a lot of people out of work here.
Well, let's add to that the question, are you going to build the $500 million icebreaker for...
Oh, my God, not that.
Just a minute, that's what was said, was it not?
Yes.
And are you going to build a $500 million icebreaker?
We are going to build an icebreaker, and it will be an Arctic class, Class 8 polar icebreaker. It will be what we need in the north.
The Americans still don't accept our sovereignty, do they?
Different questions, but let me take them one by one. The Liberals for years would not take actions to assert Canadian sovereignty over the north. We've done that, and we've also said that we're going to build the icebreaker capacity that is necessary. Where it will be built, I don't know, because it hasn't been decided. But I certainly am aware of the factors that the caller from Armstrong was indicating, and we certainly have received through British Columbia members of Parliament a strong recommendation that there should be that we should be building it or part of it here, and we're taking that very seriously. Second question. No, the Americans don't agree with our sovereignty claim. If they agreed with it, the Liberals would have done it a long time ago. The real test of governments, and indeed of the independent actions of governments, is when we assert positions that other people don't agree with. That's our north, and we're not going to let there be any doubt cast on it. We're prepared to go to court, as the Liberals weren't, but we've taken actions to demonstrate that it's ours to occupy it.
More with Joe Clark after the break. Local question, Mr. Clark. The 10-year agreement with the Americans for the use of Nanuspe for testing of metering equipment for nuclear submarines expires in April 1986. You're going to re-sign that agreement for the continued presence of the testing by the Americans at Nanus?
Just can't answer that. I don't know where that negotiation stands right now, and next time I'm on, Jack, I'll be better informed.
Go ahead from Clearbrook.
Hello, Mr. Clark.
Hello.
Earlier you're talking about trade talks between the States, Canada, and Japan.
Right.
And you proposed that they be held in Montreal. Well, I can understand with the millions of dollars being spent on Expo that we can't somehow show off our facilities here and, be a feather in the cap for everybody. Is it just another shove for the West? I'll hang up.
No, our problem, in fact, we took a look at where there was hotel space. This is a very big, it's a short conference, but it has an awful lot of people coming here, and precisely because Expo is on this summer, it would be difficult for us to find the kind of hotel accommodation in Vancouver. Let me tell you that there were voices around the cabinet table suggesting Vancouver.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Clark. A few incidents that your firm was involved in abroad.
Speak up a little clearer, please.
I'm sorry. The Korean airline 007 incident where Canadians were killed. Your department did nothing. Incident of a Langley travel agent held down in South America waiting extradition. Your department did nothing. Farley Mowat being denied access to the United States. Your department did nothing. I'm not pleased with the performance of your department, sir, and as far as I'm concerned, they can sacrifice your entire department and use its budget to help bring down the deficit. I'd like to hear what you have to say about these things.
He just wants to wipe you out, Joe.
Well,
forget the Langley incident. I know your department did a lot of work in the Langley incident because I unfortunately got involved in a peripheral way in that. Complaint about the Korean airliner? You did nothing about it?
Well, that happened before I got there. We have taken a position. I followed the KAL question when I was directly with Mr. Gromyko when I was in the Soviet Union. I won't pretend I got very far, but certainly Canada made our case known and continue to. The McCarran case in Langley you've already talked about, and I've been deeply involved in it, and it isn't as easy as it seems, but the department, as you say, has been very much...
very helpful. Yeah. Go ahead, please.
And on Farley Mowat.
Mr. Clark,
oh, yeah, just a minute. On Farley Mowat.
On Farley Mowat.
They gave him a best-selling book, which was really a piece of junk in many ways.
Farley's complaint was that we suggested he not go to the U.S. on a certain day. We did, because the place he wanted to go to give his lecture was closed. And we thought that it would be better if he was going to give his lecture that he go there when there were people who could hear him. Now, I'm not happy about the way the Americans handled that. And I mean, guess what my last gift to Secretary Schultz was?
No.
I gave him Farley Mowat's book.
You did? The little book?
The little book. Yeah.
That should have been a magazine article at most. It couldn't fill the book.
No, you're just a competing author.
No, I'm not. I'm not. I'm just jealous. Hardly know it, we call him. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, yes, I have a couple of questions regarding free trade.
Yes?
The first thing is, I agree Premier Davis definitely does have a right to say something, but I'm wondering, have you not bothered inquiring as to his figures? Because I would think you should be concerned about it.
Premier Peterson, you mean?
Yes. Yes, right.
Yes, we've...
And also about U.S. protectionism being the common enemy. I mean, wouldn't the common enemy be they're not wanting to have restrictions, or the Canadian protectionism?
Oh, sure. But let's take it one at a time. There are going to be a lot of arguments about figures, and that's one of the reasons why when we had a First Ministers' Conference in Halifax in November, a committee that I chaired and that had Ontario and other provincial ministers on it, agreed that we should set up a common database so that there won't be arguments between the provinces and the federal government about the figures involved. We've already started work on that, and I think you will find that what Premier Peterson was talking about was the possible threat to some jobs. We believe that threat doesn't exist. Secondly, with regard to Canadian protectionism, obviously, we can't make the case that we bring down barriers elsewhere in the world unless we're prepared to bring down barriers here. And this government's already done that. We did that recently on shoes. It was politically difficult in some parts of the country, but we did it because we have to practice what we preach.
But mind you, it's surely as plain as the nose in our face, Mr. Clark, that were the American manufacturers able to invade Canada without tariff, that our principal manufacturing areas like Ontario and Quebec would be devastated to begin with and be a changeover until competition reaccepted either country's skills.
Sure, and any trade negotiation is simply the start of a long process. We've got to talk about where there might be some movement, and then the movement will take place over time, trying to increase jobs in Canada and not the opposite.
Go ahead, please.
Hello, Mr. Clark.
Hi.
Morning. I'd like to ask you a question in regard to state terrorism. First of all, how do you define state terrorism? How do you justify the actions on Tunisia and the headquarters of the PLO? And why does Canada act so strongly when there is not even enough evidence to prove that the Libyans were involved? My second question is regarding the Afghan refugees. What is Canada doing about it? Thank you.
two distinct and clear questions, and I'll try to answer them as clearly. First of all, with regard to the Israeli raid on Tunis, immediately, on behalf of the government of Canada, I condemn that raid. And you will, I think, remember that there was some controversy about it, but I did it because I agree there can't be that kind of double standard. Well, and proof. We have reasonable proof that there was a relation between Libya and the atrocities in Vienna and Rome Airport. Afghanistan, a very complicated question on those POWs. We're involved with the UN High Commissioner on Refugees. We're involved with the International Red Cross. We are doing everything we can to see if there is some way that Canada can bring them out. I wish it were straightforward. It isn't. You might know that I was on the Afghan border 4 weeks ago in Pakistan. And if I may just say one thing about that crisis, it's important that we try to deal with individual victims of it. But what is perhaps even more important is that we turn the attention of the world again to the atrocity in Afghanistan, because it is a tragedy that people tend to forget. And not only is it important that the attention be paid there, it's important it happen now, because we think there's some evidence that the Soviets are getting increasingly nervous about Afghanistan. Public opinion might push them back.
When you say that we have proof of the Libyan involvement in the Vienna and Rome raids, that means, I presume, that we're accepting the American intelligence information which they show to you.
It is not exclusively American intelligence information.
But we're not investigating it for ourselves.
No. But we do have access to the range of services
through the Western nations.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah.
Good morning. My husband is presently employed in Libya. Could you comment on Canadian safety currently working in Libya?
We issued a statement the other day in which we indicated what we were doing as a government, and in which we suggested that Canadians in Libya should take a very hard look at whether or not, in their own judgment, they think they should come out. The American government has means of forcing their people home. We don't have those means, but we are trying to flag to people who are working in Libya now that we think conditions have changed. We don't know how far they've changed. The reports I have from the diplomats I have sent there in the last 6 or 7 days are that there is quite a bit of calm, but I think that it calls for a hard, careful decision on the part of everyone in Libya, and if your husband wants to get out, our government will help him get out.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're a little bit pessimistic on that. You'd say that the Canadians in Libya should gauge it very close to themselves, and if they feel that things are coming to a crisis, get out.
Yes, and we're helping them. We've got people in place. We've got extra consular officers there if they decide they want to come out. We can't make those decisions for them at long distance. It's not that, first of all, it would be we can't enforce those decisions. I can't order Canadians who are in other parts of the world to do certain things.
But you can help them get out when they want to go.
And we've got people on the ground to help if they want to go.
Best of luck in the free trade talks.
Thank you.
And let's hope this Gaddafi terrorism never reaches the shores of North America. My thanks to Joe Clark, the Minister of External Affairs. Next, Child Find, after the break. When families split up and children go missing and can't be found, it's one of the worst kind of personal domestic tragedies there can be, and sometimes the children are never found. In the studio this morning, I've got Julie Cullen, the co-chairman for Canada of Child Find. I have a lawyer who's dealt with many of these kind of cases, whose name is Bruce Katz. And I have a father, Phil Amisano, who has the problem right now. Phil, let's take your problem first.
Okay.
When did your child disappear?
January the 9th, 1984.
Have you any idea where she is?
We have indications, but that's it.
Now, did you have a custody order at the time your child was taken away by your wife?
I have a custody access.
You have a custody access?
At the moment, I have custody.
Now, have you not managed to trace her? Is she in Canada with the child, or is she out of Canada?
All indications she's out of Canada.
Out of Canada. Let's go to you, Julie. Is Mr. Amisano's circumstances one which is going to be helped by the announcement by Perrin Beatty that he's taken what he calls a major initiative to help solve the missing child in Canada?
Maybe in the long view, Jack, but you know, we have to be very careful about what we say about the initiatives. We have to look very cautiously to the minister and what he's doing, and of course we're very pleased. In Mr. Amisano's case, because we are fairly certain that they are still out of the country, External affairs is an approach that we have to use. That does not necessarily interfere with what Mr. Beattie is doing, but that doesn't mean that those initiatives are going to be in respect of trying to locate a child internationally. And 57% of the children that we do locate are done so in international land. And that includes the United States, of course, but that we're seeing a tremendous trend with parents who have dual citizenship or access to other countries by other means where they will eventually take the children to.
Well, does your wife have access to another country?
She has a boyfriend who's an American citizen.
And likely it may well be that your daughter Jennifer is in the United States. Is there any machinery in the United States, Mr. Katz, which can help him to find his daughter, or purely the private detective route?
Well, you're dealing with the United States, 50 states, all of which have separate jurisdictions and separate rights and laws dealing with children. You go pick and choose and you try to find where your kid is, and the difficulty is when someone's going to go off and try to hide, they've got a lot of territory there to make it very difficult for you to find them. I would say if someone's bound and determined to not allow themselves to be found, you got a real hard and expensive journey.
Only if they, especially if they leave Canada.
Especially if they leave Canada. Especially if they leave Canada.
Well, let's look at the central registry. What is it that Perrin Beattie is going to try to, says he will do? He's our Solicitor General, isn't he?
Right. Well, we've got 5 initiatives on the table, all right? We've got the conference in 1986, a proposed conference to bring all the players in the missing children's area together to talk. We have a research project initiated in Montreal to determine exactly what is the problem in this country with missing children. Hopefully there'll be 3 other major metropolitan police areas involved in that research study. We have a proposed National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, something that might follow along the line of what they have already in Washington, D.C. We also have a declared National Missing Children's Day. Those types of initiatives are what we are looking for to try to press the problem.
Now, there are 2 kinds of missing children, are there not? There's the missing child whom you see on the television stations all the time, where the presumption, I think, in the United States is that they have disappeared as a result, perhaps, of criminal action.
We actually, well, yes and no. Let's look at it very pragmatically. We've got 4 types of missing children as far as we can determine. We have children who disappear for no explained reason. We have children who run away. We have children abducted by persons unknown, which we used to call stranger abduction. We have persons abducted by parent. So we have 4 categories we're dealing with, all have very unique circumstances to those situations. In order to make a determination of what the even statistical base in this country is with respect to missing children, that's where the National Registry, hopefully, will try to signify category
When I
statistics.
used to do these things in detail a number of years ago across Canada, and I'd go to a tonnage general here and a tonnage general there, the biggest stumble, Mr. Katz, was the fact that we couldn't get at the children's allowance records. We couldn't get at the income tax records. Can you get at them now if you're looking for a missing child in Canada?
The biggest problem for a parent is trying to locate where the child is. The second problem will be a legal problem after they locate the child.
But first you got to find the child.
First you got to find the child. And as far as the freedom of information from government agencies, if someone's living in Canada, filing for social assistance, filing for income tax returns, and getting replies back from government agencies, the basic answer is very little cooperation, if any, and no information given.
I thought that was going to be in Perrin Beattie's plan.
Well, I think that it's probably more covered under Mr. Crosby's, proposed Bill C-49, where they're looking at new amendments to the Divorce Act with respect to family allowance and welfare and unemployment as a method to gain access to information which might locate a parent in default of maintenance or alimony. In that same respect, Jack, we already can now, through contacts with private investigators and police, get limited amounts of information in that exact role. That is not the only way to find these parents, however. So we have to look at all the alternatives and options. Clearly, if a parent's patterns don't change, and we found that there's a profile that they don't, there's lots of ways to try to find them and pick up leads to locate the children, including school records. So we use a combination of parental background and the age of the children and what might signify a good lead for that child, and try to coordinate and then start the legal process to have them returned.
If you wouldn't mind telling me, Mr. Amisano, just a little more of, you obviously had separated from your wife at some time.
Prior, right.
And she had the child.
That's correct.
Then when did you find your child was missing?
I got a letter from her January the 16th, 1984, stating that if I didn't agree to full custody, because we were in a custody courts procedures at that time, that I'd follow all the procedures that she outlined, given her full custody and such and blah, that I would never see the child again. Now this is after she had already abducted the child.
After she?
Yes.
And did you have any indication the day she left, how she left, or where she went?
I had a letter stating that she was staying in Canada, and that was it. From that point on to this point, there's only one other time that I heard from him, and that was through her parents, and that was it. That's the only...
And you believe now that they left by boat, I think, did they?
Her boyfriend has a boat, and he's an American citizen, and it's an ocean-going sailboat, and that's where the difficulty arises.
In other words, you're specifically worried about Jennifer because you can't have equal access or any access at all. After that, you went to the courts here and got a custody order.
That's correct.
What does that custody order do for them in terms of the law?
All right. Basic scenario, as is pointed out, you have people get married. Most of my clients profess to get married for love and affection. It crosses international borders. Take the situation where you have a husband who's Canadian, wife is American, not yet a Canadian citizen. She absconds with a child. Husband is going to have to attempt, firstly, to get a custody order. He will go into a British Columbia court, appear before a Supreme Court judge usually, and seek what's known as an ex parte order, giving him custody of the child. Now, the child is not in the jurisdiction, in that the father may believe the child is out of the jurisdiction or in the jurisdiction. He gets the ex parte order. Now the problem is, where's the child? Got to go locate the child. You raise the issue with government agencies. Another area is, what about the mother's family, trying to get information from them? The courts are very reluctant to compel, for example, grandmothers, great-grandmothers who may know the location to give the evidence. So you've got to go look. And when I say expense, I've known fathers that have spent $25,000 to $30,000 trying to locate their child. Once you find where the child is located, and assuming on a scenario that the child is in Canada but outside of the jurisdiction, then you've got the dilemma. You've got a British Columbia court order. You know your kid is living in Manitoba. If the child's been there for a period of time, let's say the abduction took place 2.5 years ago, you finally locate your child, spent a lot of money, go off to Manitoba. You can walk in there and try to re-abduct, which isn't very good for the child. In other words, don't even go to court in Manitoba, just walk in and take your kid. No one advocates that. Next step is to go hire a Manitoba lawyer to apply in Manitoba under one of their statutes to enforce the British Columbia order.
By which time the child is established, 2.5 years in school, is apparently happy with the mother, and that judge has the final jurisdiction for that moment to make a decision.
Right, and no one should criticize the judiciary, although when people are involved in custody cases, they always say, well, I lost because the judge said this or that. The judge is in a damnable position. The kid's been in a province for 2.5 years, well established, and the judge is trying to determine what is best for that child.
Good point. If you found your child tomorrow, would you abduct her? Or would you get her back? You have a custody. Would you just go and take her, wherever she was?
In the last 2.5 years, I followed the legal aspect as far as I can. No, I can honestly say I would not abduct her.
You would do it legally?
I'd do it legally. It's just too hard against the child.
Yeah, good for you. I want to take questions on child find to Bruce Katz, a lawyer, Julie Cullen, it is Julie, isn't it? Child find, and Mr. Amisano, after break. Tell me a little bit about child find, Julie. I had you on the air a couple of years ago, but I've forgotten.
Well, we started off with 3 provinces. We now have 8 provinces in a territory that have head offices of child find. We all carry a common mandate for the best interest of the child to try to locate 4 parents in any kind of situation, whether it's a runaway, disappearance, or so on.
You've got your own directories in all the provinces.
Yes, we do, except for PEI and, you know,
And
Newfoundland.
any family or any man or woman that has lost a child can come to you and you'll help look for it, will you?
They have to follow a specific criteria set down by our board of directors, of course.
What's that?
For instance, in parental kidnapping, they must have a valid custody or access order, which gives them legal rights to the child. So, I mean, we do have a lot of policy on age limits and categories that they have to follow.
You're kind of fearsome in the costs of hiring lawyers for this kind of thing, aren't they? Hey? I'll take a call. Go ahead, please. Hello.
Hello, Miss Webster.
Yes, sir.
I have an interim custody order for my son. He was taken to California, and I went down there and I brought him back up, and I got an interim custody order. What I want to know is if there's any way I can change the order to a permanent order.
First of all, did you snatch the child in California?
Yes, but I saw the police down there first and asked them if there was going to be a kidnapping charge laid on me, and they said unless somebody has a custody order already made up, then there will be no kidnapping charge. So I immediately grabbed him, brought him back up here, and proceeded to get the custody order.
And you grabbed him from school?
No, he was only 3 years old at the time.
You grabbed him from his mother?
Yes.
Right.
No, he wants a permanent custody order.
Firstly, there's lots of policemen in California, and my suggestion is you may have got one that didn't give you the right legal advice, but now you have your child anyways. You have an interim custody order. What you should do now is proceed to court by serving your wife with the notice of a full hearing with respect to the permanent custody of your child. If you know where your wife is down in California, give her notice that the trial is going to take place here, come before a judge, and run your custody case. If your wife doesn't show up, and on the facts as you've outlined them now, I would suspect that you would have a permanent custody order granted to you. The only thing that people have to realize is there's nothing permanent about the issue of custody. It's always what's in the best interest of a child, and from day to day, parents can say, I don't think that the custodial parent is doing the proper job, and bring on an application for custody.
A fresh one?
Yeah.
I've had him now for 2.5 years. What I'm concerned with is her coming up and saying, well, she wants him now.
Well, you got to go for your full custody order.
That's a chance he's going to have to take. By virtue of the fact that he was in California, and he got very lucky in our opinion, because California is the toughest state in the American system in terms of prosecuting concealment, detainment of children, and kidnapping either into or from California. So, sir, you're actually quite lucky in that respect. In the second part of that, if you don't want to use a democratic process to actually legally secure full custody of your child, then we have to question your motivations to do what's in the best interest of that child. It is your wife's right to know you are here and are planning to go for full custody of you.
She deserves the right. She took the child away.
Yes, she deserves the right, because they have equal parenting skills. Don't forget, we're talking about children who love both parents in most instances, if not all. And they have a right to both parents. The question really is, who has the right to the child? And it really depends on the circumstances and the merits of that case.
He's a Canadian-born boy, though.
Right, and that's appreciated, I think, by the courts, but that doesn't necessarily mean the best interest of the child, or that they're with you in Canada, and the courts may look at that.
Before you perhaps take that call, the dispute is always between mommy and daddy. What the courts are concerned with, really, are the rights of the child. The child does deserve the right to know both parents.
In most cases.
In most cases, yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please. Hello.
Yeah, Jack Webster?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, hi, it's Marjorie. I was in your office at one time. Anyways, it's for the father. The courts in Los Angeles are fantastic. It took me 4 years to find my kids, and I found them. And they were great with me. Anyways, I just thought I'd say good luck to you. Don't give up on your hopes, and you'll get her back.
Yeah, you went to court in California without a custody order, didn't you?
That's right, and I got custody and everything of them. It just took me a long time to find them.
Good. And how are you settling down now?
Good, fantastic, really good.
How old are the kids now?
8 and 9.
Good show, Marjorie. Thanks for calling.
Thanks.
Bye. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning. With all the ads that Child Find does in the television, why don't they publish the picture of the parent that abducted the child?
It's very clear that we would have a very specific liability if we were actually to publish photos of the parent. We have a lot of people that call in to want us to do that. In the United States, they are actually doing it. We don't feel that that's a tasteful way to go about finding the children, that we are actually looking for the child. Yes, we locate the parent by using their background and history, but we would prefer to have the child's picture out there.
Yes, but usually a child's appearance will change much quicker than an adult.
Yes, but the adults change as well, and we are working now with some police artists to do some graphic updates of the children that we use.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Go ahead, please.
Good morning.
Morning.
My question concerns parents who are under undue legal pressure. A lot of pressure can be inflicted by men, say, who have the jobs in custody suits. And for instance, in mine, my husband is, there are allegations of sexual abuse. These are very hard to prove with the child under 6, naturally, and that's what we've run into in the system over 18 months. At the moment, there's a court appointee on my husband's access. We, of course, want no access. However, I can certainly understand many thousands of dollars later, people leaving the country simply in defense.
Sure.
How about that?
In reference to your issue of undue pressure, especially by husbands with respect...
Yes, with custody fights. Even
right, with custody fights.
Yes, they're still allowed to go for full custody even with sexual abuse allegations. The legal amounts can be $40,000, $50,000.
Madam, with reference to the issue of men versus women, what I found across Canada, and this is a big change, is most provinces have in effect legislation that treats both men and women with respect to custody disputes equal. And therefore, when I find that a woman has left the country trying to use as an excuse that she had economic pressure put on her by her husband and the courts didn't give her the same rights as her husband, it doesn't wash. Canadian law across the country gives both the mother and the father equal rights to come to court, and basically the legislation protects the child in all provinces.
I was married for a very short period, and and the child is not in my husband's name, was not my husband's child.
But my point is this, is that if allegations are made against you in relation to the issue of sexual abuse, unfortunately the process is such that the allegations have to be met, and you have to go through trial to do so. And that is probably the best system that we have going right now.
Okie dokie. We'll take some more calls, if you like, on child find to Julie Cullen, Bruce Katz, and Phil Amisano after the break. National Child Find, there are the numbers. In BC, 738-3717. Mr. Amisano, how many times have you been to court on your problem?
About 8 or 9 times.
Cost you a fair bit, one way or
Yes,
another?
very much so.
Well, remember, the women always used to try, or men always used to try to get criminal charges laid against their husbands of kidnapping or abducting. Is that feasible, desirable, proper, or ever done?
Well, the Criminal Code of Canada certainly allows for parental kidnapping charges to be laid, whether there's a contravention of a custody order or where, in fact, there is no custody order under Section 250.1 and 250.2. However, it is up to the police to take the appropriate information to the Crown Attorney's office. If Crown does not choose and uses their discretion not to allow charges to be laid because of lack of concrete evidence which would allow them to prosecute on the return of the child and the parent, then they will not lay charges.
Should they be laid at times?
Not in every case.
Sometimes.
Sometimes. We're working now with the Attorney General's Office, Criminal Justice Branch, to try to review the policy to make sure that there is adequate reason to lay charges. They never even had a policy governing 250.1, which is contravention of an existing order. So we find now we need that.
But if a guy's in contempt of a court order, is he ever charged with contempt?
Oh, yes. Once you can locate him, bring him before the court and bring on contempt application, yes. And there are judges who will take the issue of violating a custody order quite seriously and imprison someone for contempt.
Has been done. Go ahead from, well, some people get in prison for contempt, some people don't. Go ahead from Powell River.
Yes, thank you. Some comments to people on your panel, Child Find. I'm going to suggest that sooner or later, organizations such as this is going to have to accept some help from Big Brother. Now, we all realize that everybody has a number. Now, at the hospital when the child is born or soon after on registration, if this number was implanted on the body in an inconspicuous place where it's standard and it's visible, this identity mark on the body would have to be shown when a child is entered into school. It would have to be shown when a mother asks for welfare payments for a child.
I have to tell you that we've already got fingerprints and dental records to identify children. There are already ways that we can do that sort of thing, and it goes against my grain to allow the state to ingrain any kind of a body with a mark.
We're trying to find these childs.
We've all got social insurance numbers too, which follow us virtually on everything we do nowadays. I think the stamping on the soles of the feet of little baby would be marking you for life for identification by Big Brother, and despite the missing children, it's not acceptable in a free and allegedly democratic society.
Well, that's only your opinion,
my
Jack.
opinion. Well, you don't agree with me, so that's what makes the world go round. Do you agree with him?
No, I don't.
Do you agree with him?
Definitely not.
Do you agree with him?
No.
You've been outvoted 4-1. That's democracy.
Right.
Majority rules. Go ahead from Williams Lake.
Yes, if you're a 16-year-old girl and you've been
Go on.
If you're a 16-year-old girl and you've been kicked out by your stepfather when your mother was out of town, as far as your grandmother is concerned, you're a runaway, and possibly even your mother thinks you're a runaway. What are your alternatives? Are you forced back home, or what step do you take? What are your rights as
What can a 16-year-old do on her own when she's been kicked out by the stepfather and grandma says she's a runaway?
Well, let's put it this way. There's no court that I know of that's going to award custody to a mother who has a 16-year-old child that either doesn't want to stay there or has been kicked out.
There's your answer. You're virtually on your own, providing you don't get into real trouble and become ward of Human Resources.
Well, if you become a ward of Human Resources at the age of 16, good luck to Human Resources trying to hold her down on the farm, too.
Okay, Gilly. Go ahead, please.
Jack, not your last caller, but the guy before with this tagging people. I think that's ridiculous. There's a program started right up here in Vancouver called SampSafe. It's a fingerprinting and ID system with hair samples. They print out 1,000 posters for you if your child goes missing. I think those are the people that you should have in your program next.
let them explain their program. Less kids, you know.
FamSafe.
I won't answer that.
Do you know about it?
Yeah, I know.
I'm going to
about
put you on hold because you're whistling.
We do not recommend, at this point in time, FamSafe. We don't recommend it because, number one, they're selling their program door to door. Number two, they're charging $20 per child approximately. Number three, their ink strip and their paper are not usable into CPIC. I mean, I've got a lot of problems with these identification programs that claim to protect or to prevent abduction, and I am tired of it.
Your advice is do not buy an identification plan for your children from anyone door to door.
No, absolutely not. And check with the RCMP, block parents, local police, or Child Find as to the credibility of programs.
Thank you very much. Which line was that on? I forget now. Was whistling on with you. Go ahead, please. Hello. Where are you? No, not there. Go ahead, please.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When people get married, I think maybe they should start thinking about when they have kids. And if a divorce goes through, it should be automatically granted visitation rights to the person who does not get custody of the kids.
Well, it depends.
And, the court should have authority to prevent people taking the kids away out of the jurisdiction of the court.
Okay, listen
without
to Bruce.
permission of the court.
Listen to Bruce Katz on that.
I agree that people should think very seriously about getting married, and it would be nice if everyone did that. Unfortunately, they don't. When they get divorced, the courts do think about the children. They do think about visitation rights. And if the parties can reach agreement when they come before a court, you run into a situation where is the court going to impose its own views of which it holds versus what the parties have agreed to. Generally speaking, access and visitation goes with any custody order, provided the people are in agreement.
Yeah, but it should be backed up by the court.
It is.
They should not be able to take the child away from the jurisdiction of that court.
He's talking about enforcing court orders, and you have to realize court orders are not a panacea. You cannot, in every jurisdiction, at any given time, enforce court orders. That's a major problem with them, and we understand that and trying to do something about it.
The system is not perfect, neither are people. But it's the people mostly that foul up the system rather than the other way around.
Generally speaking.
Go ahead, please. Wrong one. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning. Number one, listening to that gentleman said about tagging them, that is, you know, I mean, let's face it, we're not in the German concentration camps anymore, so let's, you know, get with that a bit. But what my question was now we've been talking about parents abducting the children and whatnot. How does that, is there many grandparents that do that?
Hold on.
We do know, in fact, Jack, that a lot of grandparents encourage their son or daughter to leave the marriage or the relationship and take off. They often fund them and help them get out of the country.
This is the old syndrome, hate the son-in-law, hate the daughter-in-law.
Right.
There I must leave you. Thank you very much, Bruce Katz, my lawyer friend, Julie Cullen, co-chairman of Child Find of Canada, and best of luck to you, Mr. Amisano.
Thank you.
I'll be back with a report from Schneider after the break. You may have noticed pickets in the downtown Vancouver yesterday on a sporting goods store which went out of business, when the employees are complaining perfectly properly that the bankruptcy proceedings have done them out of their wages. Here is Mark Schneider's report on the story.
Usually when a business fails, it's because someone didn't get paid. Often it's a supplier. Most of the time it's a bank calling the loan. But this time it's the BC government that didn't get paid, and because they demanded their money, those guys over there, the ex-employees, are not only out work, but they're out back wages as well. Money they'll probably never see again. AJ Brooks has had its share of problems over the last few months. Caught in a cash flow squeeze, its owner had checks bounce, checks to pay the BC government for sales tax collected. With tax and penalties totaling $21,000, the government closed the store's account. The bank moved in, appointed a receiver, and fired the workers who were still owed over $8,500. Three groups of people are owed. The employees, the government for sales tax, and the bank.
Yeah.
Where are you going to come out in all this?
If it goes into bankruptcy, which they say they're going to do momentarily, like 10 minutes from now, then we're last, and we don't get it. There isn't enough to pay the government, the bank, or the government, and then we don't get anything for sure. Right now, under receivership, the law says we get paid first, then the government, then the bank. So the bank, naturally, under the receivership, wants to put it in bankruptcy as soon as possible, because then the bank comes first, then the government, and then us.
Despite the fact that Employment Standards Act, you're pretty sure about that?
Absolutely positive. I can show you right here. It says Employment Standards Information Bulletin number 2. Wages. When must wages be paid where employment terminates? If the employment is terminated by the employer, all wages and holiday entitlement due must be paid immediately upon termination.
So I
Pretty clear to me.
But not clear to the receiver.
Well, he can get away with it by putting it into bankruptcy, and then he doesn't have to pay.
And you guys are
We're out of luck. On the street. It's kind of cold out here.
I plan on putting the company into bankruptcy, in which case the claims of the employees would be subordinate to the debenture, this secured creditor, as would the claims of others.
But right now, they are really owed the full amount under the Employee Standards Act.
Yes, that's
right.
Yes.
They actually deserve the $8,500, right?
Not in my opinion, no.
Well, you're not prepared to pay them the full amount.
That's correct.
You're prepared only to pay them $2,500.
Yes, that's correct.
That's a little bit rough.
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's $2,500 better off than they'll do when the company is placed into bankruptcy.
And they turned that down?
Yes, they did. That's correct.
And so you've withdrawn that offer of even that?
Yes, I have. That's correct.
So what's going to happen? You're going to actually put it into bankruptcy now, and then they'll never see a penny?
They will receive payment of their wages for the period that they worked for myself as receiver manager of the company, yes.
But all the other stuff's gone?
Yes, that's correct.
And what about the government's money for the sales tax? How much are they owed?
Provincial sales tax is owed about $21,000.
Are they going to see any of that?
No. No, they won't.
So even though the government initiated this whole thing by demanding payment and the bank calling the loan, they're out $21,000 too.
Yes, that's correct. The demand by the Minister of Finance on behalf of the sales tax precipitated the receivership, the action by the bank.
And does any of this really make sense? I mean, I guess as a receiver it must.
I think so, yes.
But as just common sense, it seems bizarre.
Well, it's you know, the laws of the country, I guess.
The owner says he asked the government for more time without luck.
We have had ongoing negotiations, and they were quite reasonable until they put the seizure on the account.
Well, why weren't you paying the sales tax? You're supposed to do that. That's the law.
That's the law, but if you're in a pinch, then often things happen and you can't really control that. And let's face it, you will look after your employees first. That's at least my feelings.
Think it was smart of the government?
Well, they're not calling the loan. They are calling the outstanding amount. No, I think that's ridiculous. It would have been better if they could communicate more with us. I asked the government to communicate because often they might have posted a check, but we don't have the money, but there's nobody over there you can call and say, hey, hold for 2 or 3 days and it'll be fine. And I'm sure that we have got a lot of other businesses in this province in the same position as we are. I know we do.
The government has taken a very short-sighted approach to it. Their attempts to recover their money have resulted in 7 people immediately being put out of work and our loss of wages, to which we apparently have no recourse, even though we have every legal right. It seems that there could have been more consideration given. We all know how difficult it is in the 80s to make $1. Every retail business has to face that. This seems one more case of short-sightedness on the part of the government.
The receiver has confirmed this morning he will be filing an application in BC Supreme Court later today to move the company into bankruptcy.
Let me get this straight, Mark. The guy was having cash flow problems.
That's right.
He falls behind because he paid the wages and tried to get his stock right, I suppose. $21,000 to BC government. The BC government moves in and says, hey,
close the account.
Call a debenture, whatever it was.
Yep.
And he's out of business.
That's right.
And if they'd gone into receivership instead of bankruptcy, might they have got the wages?
Oh, definitely. And in terms of the receivership laws, under receivership, the employees have a prior claim before even the debenture holders, the banks. But it was the receiver's option to put it into bankruptcy, in which case it reverses the order. The bank gets its money. There's certainly not enough either for the government or the employees.
So the government's out of luck too?
Absolutely.
So the Ministry of Finance closed, well, they were owed the money. The guy didn't pay the money. There comes a moment of crash.
That's right.
But in this particular time of tribulation in British Columbia, I'd have given them a few extra days, wouldn't you?
Well, you wonder how much it's going to cost the government now, perhaps for its contribution to UIC and perhaps welfare if it goes that far. Certainly it'll be expensive.
How many employees did you say now?
Altogether, 7 involved in this case.
And the receiver offered them $2,500 in settlement of the wages.
That's right. He wouldn't.
Of the $8,500
That's
wages.
right, exactly. They say $10,000. He says $8,500. But when they refused the $2,500, immediately the receiver withdrew his offer, so they'll get absolutely nothing.
Well, that's Hugh Curtis, closed the business today. I'm not saying he was totally wrong, but maybe there should have been a little bit more empathy involved in the whole thing.
And perhaps the owner could have been a better businessman in some regard.
Who knows? Thank you very much, Mark. Don't stop at every picket line you see downtown, will you please? Just the odd one now and again.
It's been a long time since I've been to a picket line.
Go back to the U.S. border and do that today again. I thought that was riotous.
Some people didn't like that one.
I liked it. After the news. I'm looking for my body type for tomorrow, but I can't find it. There are no wee short 220-pound people in this. This is Dr. Abra Van El's body type program. Gives you great tips. You can use 6 points to calm your adrenal glands, 2 in your tummy and 4 in your back. Listen, I'm going to interview him tomorrow. Also, John Parks and the Ombudsman. I'm going to do a walkabout this afternoon, God willing, at Lamford Seat at New Westminster, all for 9 a.m. precisely.
Expo 86. 106 days to go.
A Webster walkabout at Lamford Cedar at 9 a.m.